Hello, my name's Imogen Russell Williams. I'm a children's book critic and also a poet, although my poetry is mainly for adults. It draws on mythology, folktale, fairy tale. I like playing with and meddling with stories that have already been told and retold many times over. My first collection, The Women Left Behind, illustrated by the amazing Chris Riddell, published by Dempsey and Wendell, is this series of monologues from the points of view of women stranded or abandoned, their stories left unresolved in classical, canonical literature or myth and legend. So people like Ariadne getting abandoned by Theseus on a beach, or Bet in Oliver Twist, after Nancy is murdered by Bill Sikes. I wondered how they felt when they were left there with their stories unresolved, and I attempted to put down my version of what I thought those feelings might be on the page. I'm going to share two poems from this collection. The first one is from the perspective of Eurydice, a figure from Greek mythology who is fatally bitten by a snake not long after her marriage. And she's sent down to Hades in the underworld. But her husband, Orpheus, who's a musician so skilled that he can make stones and animals respond to his playing, wins a promise that she can return to the land of the living if he doesn't look back at her until they reach the surface. Here in the soft black ash I found some bone in fragments, femur, little finger, rib, and strung together music of my own for the first time. Halt as a child's first footsteps, thud and plink, a tonking tune, like bird scratch on the air, a blunt cascade, the overflowing brink of a mud dam. The music of my husband hails down suns. He gets out his guitar and plucks, extracts with the strings fall, the sweet note runs, his listener's guts. He had the heart from me. Of course he did. When Orpheus plays for you, you will be played. His lyre coiled me round. The serpent slid up to my waist. But now it seems I have come to prefer my own halt limping music, with a chord, strange, dissonant, dissolving in a blur. I turn his head. Here is Chris's Eurydice. I won't tilt it so that you can see. She is fantastically ethereal. The second one I'm going to share is Rosaline from Romeo and Juliet. I find her fascinating because she drives so much of the plot. If Romeo weren't in love with her, he would never have been at the ball where he meets Juliet, and yet she never appears on stage. The main thing we hear of her is that she's determined to enter a convent, which shapes my version of her, my vision of her. I took myself out of the marketplace, laid my dancing shoes in lavender, gave my quilted gowns and jewellery to the girls who wanted rings. Whispers of tragedy reached me where I knelt to tell my beads. Then, briefly, I remembered his hair's mulberry shine. I was young then myself, but he will be young forever. For years I have been praying, tending vines, thinning tomatoes, teaching homesick neophytes to sleep in cells of stone. In sunlight laced with dust and root-smelling cold damp cellars, I have breathed the air so long that my lungs have learned its shape. And the rictus of his death mask and the blood broom on her shroud have become light-faded frescoes whose colours do not hurt. But every year they ripen, those black and glossy berries, and I wonder, for a moment, would his hair have smelled so good? And such a lovely glossy rosaline with her mulberry from Chris. The last poem I'd like to share is from the collection I'm working on at the moment, which is based on the Mabinogion or Mabinogi, a collection of Welsh legends full of transformation and border places and strangeness. I'm half Welsh, that's the Williams bit, and my father used to give me children's versions of these stories with amazing, vivid, painted illustrations that still colour my dreams a bit. In the first branch, Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, is out hunting when he encounters Arawn, King of the Dead, and insults him. As Arawn sees it. Plate silver nitrate, static simmered grey, shadowy pools to swim, stark outlined branches, slain stag's heat signature a fervid outline. King of the Dead, whose goggled, avid eyes perceive the brightness of the springing blood, the steam that furls from the dark welling rent, though black and white and grey, is all he sees. He sees, too, that the dogs are not his own. Though leaf-brown and bright fox-tint, brindled bronze and palomino pallor leave no print upon the lenses of his cold, sharp gaze, he sees the thump of hearts, the heave of lungs, the hot-plumed breaths, the motley shaded hides, and his own watchful swan dogs, driven back, coiling resentful, narrowed eyes upon him, waiting for a sign to strike. And Arawn sees Pwyll, a well-made man, even in monochrome a prince, which now compounds his gross discourtesy, glutting his mortal curs upon the carcass of Arawn's kill.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for watching. And with me here today is Imogen Russell Williams. Hello.
Hi.
Here to talk about all those poems that she so beautifully wrote and performed. But firstly, I must say something. I cannot not say that. The beautiful book, illustrated by Chris Riddell. How did you pull it off?
Well, I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, I think. I happened to run into Chris at an event celebrating the glorious Jan Pinkowski and his lifetime achievement. And I mentioned that I was doing these poems, and he said, "Oh, well, send them to me." I assumed that nothing whatsoever would come of this, but then these extraordinary drawings started floating my way, and I was... Well, it was the single greatest perk of my entire career as a children's critic, I think.
Amazing. Do you think they sort of, because to me, when I was looking through the book, looking at your poems, illustrations, I think the illustrations are adding so much to your poems as well. Would you think
I mean,
so?
I dearly, dearly love illustrations in pretty much everything. Again, being a children's critic, but I think we push kids to move away from picture books and highly illustrated stuff too early. And we often tend to assume that illustration is somehow, I don't know, dumbing down, cheating, sugaring something that needs to be swallowed without any sweetening. And I love the fact that Chris's illustrations give people a way into these poems. If maybe they don't know the originals of the characters or whatever, they can see Chris's conception of the character and then decide whether that chimes with their own conception of the character, or whether maybe they would have illustrated her differently or whatever. It's just another way in. So yes, I think it enriches the book tremendously.
Yeah, definitely. And what I really loved about your book as well is that ongoing theme for it. How did you come up with the theme in this book, or this abandoned women in the story?
It really was that. I mean, I think I've always been quite an emotional and hands-on reader, and especially when I was a child, but still today, if I read a book and I feel that the character has been very poorly and unjustly treated, I do have the urge to reach into the book and save them a lot. And I think this book is basically my expression of this. I want to put it right. And obviously you can't put right all of these tragedies or these half-finished, unfinished stories. But what I felt I could do was to provide voices, or my idea of voices, for these women who never get to speak up or who get words put into their mouths for them in the originals of their stories.
And also, I've noticed recently the so much in our poetry, in our literature that's published recently, takes so much from the past as well, especially, I don't know, Greek mythology. We're talking about the Chris Riddell. I initially thought about him doing the event with Natalie Haynes about, him illustrating the Iliad for her as well.
Yes.
And so much from your stories as well, that also the well-known characters from myths and legends as well, especially the Greek ones. What are they doing in there as well? Are they part of this sort of this narrative?
I mean, I think mythology, and obviously classical mythology, never really goes away. These stories resonate with us and keep on being retold because they feel universal. But mythology, Greek mythology is particularly definitely having a very feminist moment right now. You've got your Circe, and you've got your, as you said, Natalie Haynes, and you've got a lot of translations and retellings which are looking at classical mythology from a feminist perspective, which in the past has been, it's been a very male-dominated field, and it's so thrilling and it's so exciting, and also it seems to just be something in the air, because I didn't pick out my the Greek or classical inspired figures and think, right, I'll do this because other people are doing this at the moment. It just feels like something that has arisen, and it's so exciting to be a tiny part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just wondering, it's what you just say, it's so many different names appearing from the past that it's always been forgotten and now are given a new fresh voices. But do you think that people will be able to recognize those characters from your book and sort of like know who they are? Or is it required a bit more sort of like a thinking, like, okay, I've read this book when I was at school, but now, I need to remember who this person is?
I mean, not necessarily, because what it is also, it's drawing a lot on all of my reading and various books and characters that I've been obsessed with from being a child and reading to all the way up to now. So I'm kind of not expecting anyone necessarily to read through the book and be familiar straight away with everybody that I'm talking about, because I think even if you have read the book or encountered the character's story or whatnot, you might want to refresh your memory. But that's why I have some notes in the back, just very kind of straightforward, this is who they are and this is where they came from, and if you want to refresh your memory of that. But also, the lovely thing about poetry, I particularly think, is you don't have to know and get and understand everything about it to be moved and excited and influenced by it. I read T.S. Eliot. I am not picking up on all of those intertexts and references and all the rest of it, but I don't care. I'm having a perfectly lovely time. And if I then go and do some deeper investigation and unpicking, then maybe that enriches my experience further, but I also don't think it's necessary.
I think it's quite interesting what you just say, that it's not necessarily going to be about what the author wanted to say through it, which is a theme that sort of like goes through all the meetings of all the authors I did so far. It doesn't matter what people take from it. It's important that they interpret the things the way they see them, which I think it's so liberating in a way. Do you think maybe at school children should be taught slightly differently the poetry as well?
Oh my god, yes. I really do. I mean, by all means, teach kids to recognize alliteration and assonance and every the A to Z of poetical techniques, in order perhaps to demystify, and it can be real fun, breaking down a poem in that way and going, well, maybe the poet chose to use this technique in order to create this effect. It's also not necessary, and it's really not the be all and end all. But that's not what poetry's for. It really, really isn't. And I say this as somebody who's always been quite good at and quite keen on the breaking down process. But it's not the reason why those poems were written, in order that they could then be deconstructed. And even if it were, sucks boo, once the poem is written and out there, it belongs to the reader, not the poet.
I'm just hoping that the people are getting more and more adventures with the poetry now, because I myself obviously was taught poetry at school, and it was okay. It was a bit boring at some times, but mostly I just got around to sort of like trying to understand. And then I think I stopped reading poetry because I just thought I could not understand what it was supposed to be about. And I just realized recently that it doesn't matter, that you take whatever you want from the poems. And
Yes.
you just do whatever you want with them as well, as the reader, as the listener to a poetry as well. So it's a completely new chapter opening for me, thinking that I don't need to know everything in order to enjoy it.
Well, exactly. I mean, I feel really, really passionately that poetry should belong to everyone and should feel available to everyone. And coming back to children again, there's this sort of unhappy moment when children, primary school children particularly, love poetry, especially when it's really bouncy and vigorous and involves participation and call and response, and is a real visceral shared experience. But bit by bit, as it becomes more and more focused on this analysis and breaking down, and those are not bad things, but when they become exclusively the way you approach a poem, as though it's a mathematical problem with a right answer, and then, as you were just saying, people begin to think that poetry has a right and wrong way to approach it, and if you don't know the right way, you must be a bit stupid, and poetry is not for you, poetry is for the clever people. And that makes me so angry and heartsick. For goodness sake, if the further we can get away from this mindset, both as teachers and students, the better.
Yeah, and I think it sort of like continues through that adulthood, say, oh, I don't read poetry, it's not for me. Well, I've really loved the fact that there's so much poetry is now more accessible for everyone, and you can just not necessarily feel obliged to reach for a book and read a poem and then feel like, oh, I just spend like this £5-6 on something I don't understand. What's the point? Instead, you can, for example, listen to a poem performed as well, watch the like a sort of art visualization of the poem as well. It's so many different means of approaching the poetry. It just makes me think that, there's so much more, there's such a scope, is such a more wider than the people think as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and also slam poetry, performance poetry having a huge resurgence with YouTube and so on. And you just, again, the second something is easier to find your way into, the second because poetry should resonate with its reader or its listener, and the second the gap is narrowed and it's easier for that resonance to start going on, as we were saying earlier about Chris's illustrations, I hope that again is part of what they do for my book, then it's so much more likely that more people will be moved by poetry, more people will find the poetry which is their poetry. Maybe they'll have a look at some of the stuff which they don't consider their poetry and discover that actually it was their poetry all along. Maybe they will start thinking about writing, creating, recording their own poetry too, and it will be fantastic. Everyone will be a poet.
It would be amazing. It's like everyone a poet. That's actually nice. That's actually a nice title for a poem.
It is.
We shall be asking our readers to write something later. Maybe you can make a competition.
A big good one.
Yeah, it is. You've heard it here first. But do you think that your poetry has themes? Obviously, we're talking about the feminism and forgotten women voices, but and you were talking about your fascination with legends and mythology. Why is it you think that you write about particular themes? Why the authors, the poets, write about particular themes as well?
I mean, I have a hard time answering that because I'm a very feelings-led poet, I think. The the cerebral and thoughtful stage comes a bit later when I edit and refine. But when I start writing something, I don't usually know why I start writing it. I just get sort of dragged by the collar into it, and then when I'm in it, I have to figure out what it is. But I think with mythology and legend, it's just the hugeness and the strangeness simultaneously with the familiarity. So you could be transformed, you could be plucked from the place you've lived all your life and dumped down somewhere else and have to make the best of it. You could go through war on just this horrendous scale that will strip away everything that made you you, and you have to find out who you still are having gone through that. And I think I don't know why those themes resonate with me particularly, but they just feel very fruitful creatively. I don't think anyone could ever run out of things to say about them in new ways.
And you also the newest the last poem in your presentation, in your poetry performance, was something new you're working on. Now I'm gonna butcher it completely if I said myself, so maybe just please do tell us about this Welsh myth that inspired you.
So it's quite usually known as the Mabinogion, but that is based on a sort of a small error that then passed into common usage. So now, especially more Welsh-leaning people will call it the Mabinogi. But these branches of Welsh legend, and then some extra more Arthurian stories. And I've always been fascinated with them because I am half Welsh, and my dad used to tell me some of these stories. Although, as I now realise, he told me and provided me with the very cleaned up versions, and it's all a lot more alarming now that I encounter the original. But they're glorious stories. I've got a couple of Mabinogi base stories in The Women Left Behind as well. I have Blodeuwedd and Branwen, and now I'm addressing. I don't know. I'm doing what I do, which I'm not sure what that is. Retelling, responding to the four branches of the Mabinogi, and it's been very weird, but also quite fulfilling during lockdown, because there's a moment when a curse is triggered and all people and all domesticated beasts vanish from the earth. And I'd started writing about this just before lockdown came into force, and then it was so strange. It was like, is this some kind of invocation or prophecy? What has happened here? But it was quite good in a way to be writing something that, from a great distance of time and a great distance in terms of it being mythology rather than fact, was what was going on in a way in my own life. I quite appreciated that.
That's very interesting. I wonder how many poems and how many artists will sort of come out from a lockdown with this sort of like this completely new poems, new art forms that they perform because of under this completely unusual circumstances as well. So I wonder if it's going to be a fruitful thing, or everyone would just basically want to forget about it completely and never ever mentioned in any artwork whatsoever.
I think it's going to be very interesting seeing what comes of it, because for some people it has definitely been extremely fruitful. There's been uninterrupted time, and the conditions which you never think will actually come about, the perfect storm when you will actually write your novel. But also, a lot of people have felt just so, a sense of low-key grief, and obviously in many cases nothing low-key about the grief. People have been lost, family members have been lost, and have just felt squashed and depressed and unable to work creatively at all, and then also maybe quite guilty about that because everyone else seems to be perfecting their sourdough and producing their
As a second manuscript editions.
Yes, exactly. But I'm sure that it can't help but be grist to the mill, to the creative mill in some way. For most people, who work creatively, because something that huge is going to express itself at some point and in some way. Whatever that way is, it's going to maybe be different for everyone, but I'm sure it's going to work itself out in, well, we'll see.
Okay, we're going to have a look at some point if there are any particular themes coming out of lockdown and closure and you know, being completely isolated and alone. That would be quite interesting to see if, I know, if anyone does this sort of like a poetry critic and stuff like that, if they can just like get those themes and put them in an anthology or something like that. That would be quite an interesting thing to do.
It would, it really would.
And yeah, I'm just wishing you a very good luck with your work on your new projects as well. Hopefully, it's going to be as beautifully published as the current one was.
Oh, thank you very much.
And if people are looking forward to contacting you, want to find you on social media, what's the best place to find you?
I use Twitter a bit less than I used to, but I do. I pop onto there every now and again. So on Twitter, I'm at Imogen RW, and otherwise, my website is just my full name, ImogenRussellWilliams.com, and then you can get hold of me via email through that as well.
Excellent, excellent. Always nice to have some sort of like things coming through there, you know. Through it. But if you're coming to talk about this poetry competition, I was there first. Just saying.
You can, please. You can organise this poetry competition. That will be. I will very happy to hand that one over to you.
Okay, we'll see what I can do about it. And thank you so much for having this lovely chat with us. I hope everyone enjoyed your poetry and the book. It should be available from the library as well to borrow, so to do borrow it is great. And we'll see you soon for another interview, and I hope you enjoyed this one. Take care.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had the most glorious time.
Thank you, and yeah, thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye.